let me just welcome everyone again for this third session. We are extremely thankful and humbled by the reception that this masterclass has had from different people from around the world. We see, for example, that most, if not all, of the people that stayed for the whole period of time on the first masterclass, they came back for a second round, and they continue to pour in. And we see that many of them are also joining today. We're very thankful also for the feedback that we have received through LinkedIn, direct messages, through the chat box during the masterclass, and so we're very thankful for this. As we have already mentioned, and I'm not going to have a PowerPoint presentation for this or anything, we are the Governance Action Hub. We are a governance lab focused on finding strategies for better and more collaboration and inclusion in the solution of concrete problems around the world. We started in Peru and Colombia with 2 country programs. As we were getting ready for the next round of countries, a lot of things happened in the international development world, including the closing of USAID and so. So we changed our strategy to try to respond to the moment. And looking also to engage more in a more diverse set of networks and efforts and initiatives worldwide, not only country-based work. And because of this, we're now engaged in a full strategy around rethinking democracy and rethinking ways for climate action, influence, and energy transition strategies that are inclusive in nature. We're very thankful for your interest, and we want to tell you something. You already heard about the benefits of the masterclass, right? Like the possibility of having one-on-one coaching sessions with Julio Guzman, the certificates that we're going to be sending to you. And this is, we have set up basically a way just as a stimulus also for you to come back like to different sessions, that you'll get your certificate if you have attended at least 4 of the sessions. And there will be like a short quiz with things that come from the masterclass. And based on how you do there, you'll get your certificate. Whatever we can do to help also. If you have other ideas in how to engage, that will be fantastic. One concrete thing that we have discussed with Julio, given the acceptance and the interest that this masterclass has generated, is that we would actually like to explore with you, people that are coming back every week and that seem very interested in the topic, finding ways to apply this to wherever you are doing your work. For example, is it an adaptation of this masterclass for your organization or for your network or for other organizations that you know in your own country or region? Something that will be of interest to explore and co-sponsor? We are open to this. Remember, as I told you during the first session, this masterclass is here not because it was an idea of Natida, Alessandra, of Tracy, or myself, right? This is actually an initiative of Julio. And Julio is a member of our Governance Explorers Network. The idea of the Governance Explorers Network is to connect people with different expertise and experiences with those with interests and challenges identified around governance in a way, in practical ways, so more people can collaborate towards the solution of a concrete problem. This is part of what we do. We are set up to do this during the year 2026, but obviously we will do it also based on demand and interest from others. If we see that you are interested in actually trying something new to particular problems that you have been tackling over the last few years and connecting with networks and initiatives that you may not have had the chance actually to engage with in the past, we're happy to help in terms of like being a broker of knowledge or a broker of networks and so. So I'm going to stop there. And of course, please contact us. We constantly pour and send information about like how to reach out. You can send me a direct email. You can contact Natida. You can put your information on the chat box and we'll collect that so we can follow up with you. Looking forward for ways for keep interacting and for this masterclass and whatever comes next, right, to be useful in the end to the work, to the efforts, to the sacrifices that you have made in your career. Thank you very much. Good luck. And I'm going to leave you now with our masterclass expert session manager orchestrating this, Don Julio Guzman. Julio, go ahead, take it away. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Mario. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I am extremely happy that you are keeping participating in this masterclass. The idea, as I told you at the very beginning, is that in order to conduct policy reform, you need to have a multidisciplinary approach, and you need to do several things even beyond policy design, as we already discussed. So thank you very much for keep participating and sharing with me these experiences. I'm gonna, as always, from the very beginning, try to remember all of you what we are gonna do. When we start looking at policy reform from the very beginning, we start saying that I'm sorry, excuse me. I had one little technical problem. We're gonna solve immediately. All right. Okay. It's here. All right. Do you see it that clearly, right? Okay. What's going on? I'm sorry, excuse me. Something is not working. I'm gonna stop for a minute and see what happened here. Excuse me. All right. Okay. All right. Okay, I hope you can see the presentation.
Yes, we can on our side.
You can? Okay, great.
If
All right,
other
so
participants have problems
yes.
at any point seeing, just let us know on the chat box, please.
Okay, thank you. So we are just reviewing the structure of the masterclass as we do every single time, just to remember you what we are discussing in the whole workshop. So we talk about the necessity first of understanding who was a reformist leader, who we are. That's the starting point. We need to understand, we need to know ourselves in order to be sure that our purpose is clear and to be sure that we have a clear idea of what reform is. After that, we said that the second step is to try to transit from an idea that we have to make policy reform to policy design, and to try to discuss how we can do that. How are the questions and the tests that we need to pass? And at the same time, how can we craft policy design to become a reality? But that it's not enough. Once you are sure of your mission, once you are sure about your purpose and who you are, and then you have an idea and you work really hard with evidence and design and talking to people, etc., to have your policy very well designed, then you need to communicate that. And you need to convince and to influence people about the necessity of doing that. So the communication side of policy reform is extremely important. But after that, unfortunately, that is not enough. Because you could have a wonderful idea, you could have a wonderful purpose and the design of the policy. But if you don't understand how the government works, what are the rules within the government, what are the limitations and the opportunities, it's going to be really hard. So the other step is to understand the system and what are the opportunities and limitations of government. But aside from that, unfortunately, the work is not done yet. We need to identify the stakeholders, the people who are going to oppose to us and the people who are going to support us in this effort. How can we identify allies? How can we learn from people who can join us in our fight? How can we negotiate? How can we make this happen through the process of dealing with stakeholders in the whole society in general? And finally, how can we survive from this? The process of implementing policy reform at any level, at the local level, at the federal level, non-profits, international organizations, it's a really hard process personally, emotionally. So it's really important that all of you could have psychological tools to deal with this process. You're going to be attacked. You're going to be marginalized. You're going to feel alone. And this is not easy. So at the very end, we're going to start discussing some of the experiences that I had and how I could survive from this very intense process of trying to make policy reform within the government. So after doing this general overview of the masterclass, we're going to start with the third session. And the third session is about storytelling. It's our ability to create a narrative to convince people about our idea. And I would like to be very clear here with communication, which is not understood. One thing is that you are a brilliant guy, a brilliant policymaker that designed a wonderful policy, technically well equipped with evidence base. You have been talking to a lot of people to give you information. You have everything set up. That's one thing. And another completely different thing is that you are going to be able to convince people about your idea. Are two different businesses. One is to make bread and the other is to make shoes. And many times people don't understand this. Policymakers, particularly the policymakers who has been trained academically really intense, they put a lot of weight on the technicalities of the policy reform. And when people don't understand and when people don't get convinced, they get frustrated. We get frustrated because that happened to me many times, many years ago. And indeed, the problem is that we don't understand that in order for policy reform to happen, we need to convince people. And people are not necessarily the ones who understand our language, our policymaking language. We need to talk to politicians. We need to talk to businessmen. We need to talk to religious leaders. We need to talk to civil society organizations and so on. We need to talk to the population in general at different levels of society. So that requires another skill, which is communication. And we're going to talk about this in this session. This is a very famous painting. This painting is depicting Francisco Pizarro, who was the conquistador of South America. Francisco Pizarro, if you see my mouse, is here on the left. And on the right is Carlos Tafur. Carlos Tafur was the emissary, the messenger of the government of Panama, of the governor of Panama. Francisco Pizarro was trying to find this empire that is full of gold and silver. And they suffer a lot trying to get from Panama to Peru to try to find this place that was completely unknown. The travels, the expeditions of Francisco Pizarro were 3 of them, and the second one, which is on the green arrows, was extremely hard. Francisco Pizarro had 160 soldiers that departed from Panama here on the north in order to get to Peru, that was a completely unknown territory. And Francisco Pizarro went with 160, but every time they went south and south and south, soldiers were dying because of hunger. They were dying because of the fights with the indigenous communities. They were dying for sickness. It was extremely hard until Francisco Pizarro get to this when the golden star is called Isla del Gallo. In Isla del Gallo, the soldiers rebelled against Francisco Pizarro and said, we don't want this anymore. We want to return to Panama. And the governor of Panama sent a messenger, Carlos Tafur, to tell Francisco Pizarro, you know what? This is done. We don't want to get south because people is dying. The soldiers don't want to be here. So we're going to return to Panama. At that point, from the 160 soldiers that Francisco Pizarro had, only 65 survive. Only 65 survived, and they were in Isla del Gallo, in that golden star that I show you. And at this point, Francisco Pizarro had a dilemma. And the dilemma is, what I'm gonna do? I spend money, I spend time. This is my project. This is my vision. This is my dream. And I'm gonna just give up and return to Panama? And that's it? So Francisco Pizarro, in all the expedition and across the expedition, Francisco Pizarro gathered evidence, a lot of evidence. Indigenous people who told him, there is an empire on the south that is full of gold and silver. Also evidence in other places when Pizarro saw artifacts made on gold and silver that were very sophisticated and of course didn't belong to those indigenous communities. It belonged to a greater civilization. But on the other hand, Pizarro on the expedition got more evidence because they were people who were saying, oh, you know what, if you cross a river, you're gonna find people who are, who have a greater cities and walls and everything. So Francisco Pizarro knew because he had evidence. But also, he has another kind of evidence that the indigenous communities didn't have weapons and didn't have sophisticated way of defense themselves. But when Francisco Pizarro was in Isla del Gallo, in that golden star, and he faced this dilemma, what I'm gonna do? I have 65 soldiers and I want to go south because I know there is an empire and most of them want to return to Panama and my dream is gone. So Francisco Pizarro did something. He made a speech. And that's the point in which I would like to go with communication in policy reform. Francisco Pizarro made a speech and he said, I want to tell you, everyone who wants to return to Panama is free to go there. But let me tell you something. And he took his sword and put a line on the floor and said, across this line, it's misery. If you stay here, it's richness. If you cross this line, it's gonna be shame for you and your family. But if you stay, you're gonna have glory. If you cross this line, the generations of your family will forget about you. But if you stay, your grandchildren will always remind you and will be proud of you. So this is your decision. And after Francisco Pizarro said that, 13 soldiers stay, and the rest crossed the line and decided to return to Panama. And because Francisco Pizarro did that, and Francisco Pizarro convinced 13 people, he was able to go to the south, to see the Inca Empire full of gold and silver, and finally he achieved his dream of finding finally this place that he was looking for so many years. He returned to Spain, and finally he returned with a much bigger expedition, and Francisco Pizarro conquered South America. Why I'm telling you this story? I'm telling you this story because Francisco Pizarro knew very well why communication and storytelling for policy reform is extremely important. Francisco Pizarro, if you listen to the story, Francisco Pizarro didn't tell the soldiers, oh, you know what? I have evidence. I did my homework and I have all the data that we need to make a decision. We know, we talk with indigenous people, we know about the artifacts, we know that they commented us about this empire. Francisco Pizarro didn't say that. Francisco Pizarro didn't rely on policy design or policy technicalities to convince people. All that information, Francisco Pizarro have it here. But instead of doing that, Francisco Pizarro told a story. And that's my point. Francisco Pizarro moved from rationality to emotions. And he said, if you cross, misery. If you stay, richness. If you cross, shame. If you stay, glory. That's emotion, that's storytelling. It's completely different. And he convinced 13 soldiers that were enough. enough to go south in a boat and to discover the Inca Empire. And the rest is history. So that is why Francisco Pizarro was successful. Not because he knew, not because he was a policymaker and have all the information in his mind, but because he was able to communicate through emotions. And that's the main point of this session, is good policy reform needs great storytelling. And unfortunately, in many cases, including myself, that I have been trained in policymaking, we always have the natural tendency to believe that knowledge is the most important thing to convince people. And when we go to tell them our great idea and they don't get it, we blame them instead of telling ourselves, it's your fault because you were not able to tell a good story. Many times happened that to me. When I was in the Inter-American Development Bank for 10 years, I was advising several countries in Latin America to apply pro-poor trade policies. And I was feeling great because I felt that I really know, that I was trained, that I did my job. And when I would travel to all these countries and tell them what to do, very few of them listened, and very few of them got the idea. And I got very frustrated, but why? And I start creating scenarios and explanations that were illusions. Like, for instance, they don't know because they are not very well educated. They really are not exposed to the information that I have. They don't have a global perspective, and that's why they think this way. They are not interested in development because they don't get my idea. And those explanations were illusions, because the real thing is that I was unable to tell story, to tell a good story to convince them. And then I learned. And then a few years after that, I start realizing the importance of communication, and I start training myself, and I start reading, learning, listening, and trying to craft storytelling to convince people until today that I feel some kind of comfort in telling stories. And I'm gonna share with you how did I did it and what kind of stories work, okay? So you ready? First of all, why good policy reform needs great storytelling? For one straightforward reason, because policy reform requires need change in human behavior. When we have seen in the past sessions that policy reform requires people to change their ways of working. In government, for instance, if you're going to change things, you need that people work differently, that the dynamic between their team could be different. You need people to create new programs. You need people to manage the budget differently. You need people to engage with different stakeholders to make them participate in the design of the policy. And all of that require change in human behavior. Making policy reform, as I said, is more change in human behavior rather than technicalities. So that is the reason why you need storytelling. And why, finally, because behavior, it's about emotions. It's not about rationality. And that's something that took me years to understand, that people change their behavior not because of reason, but because of emotions. And there is a biological explanation about that. This is the human brain. And I just signaled two parts. One is the prefrontal cortex, which is the rational center, in which we use our logic, argumentation, and everything to try to understand things in life, everything that surrounds us. And then we have the amygdala, which concentrates the emotional center. And the emotion center is the one that accumulates and registers and records all the experiences, of the extreme experiences that we had in life. Like, for instance, significant and intense experiences in happiness, of satisfaction, or excitement. But at the same time, the amygdala storage all these experiences that we have about fear, about anxiety, about stress. And the importance of the amygdala is that because it's storing all these experiences, the amygdala help us to anticipate situations of danger or anticipate situations of satisfaction. And that's how we survive, because of emotions, because we have this information. We know if we are going to face situations of extremes. And because of the amygdala and because of the emotion center, we survive. And from 300,000 years ago, emotions were able for us to survive, no rationality. One example, it's one human being, one Homo sapiens sapiens, many thousands of years ago, he was in the middle of the jungle. Then he heard a roar, okay, a roar. The human being at that time, he seated on a rock and start thinking, oh, that roar, okay, let's analyze the data, okay? Let's analyze the evidence. That roar could be a small wild cat, yeah. It could be a wild dog, or it could be a tiger. Do you really believe that the Homo sapiens sapiens at that time just start rationalizing or start thinking about the data to make a decision? No. Indeed, what he did was to just run. I don't care what it is, but I need to run. So the fight or flight reaction is based on emotions, and emotion give us the opportunity to survive and not thinking. So that is the reason, the biological reason why emotions and communications are more important than reason for making a human being to change his behavior. You can silence reason, but you cannot silence a heartbeat. And the explanation is the following. If you try to convince, follow me with this idea. If you're trying to convince people with logic, you're making a mistake. And why? Because you can contradict logic. Logic could have different scenarios. You can explain one thing to people with reason, and the people can make you a lot of questions about that and could tell you yes, but also it's likely that this happened. So reason has different ways of confronting different ideas and arguments. That's how life works. So when you appeal to logic and reason, it's really easy to confront that idea with another one. But you cannot confront an emotion. When you like someone, you just like him. You just like her. If someone tells you, you know what, I'm going to explain to you why you shouldn't be liking this person, are you going to change your mind? No, because liking someone is an emotion. And there are many emotions. Emotions are strong. Emotions are very difficult to change. Emotions are natural, spontaneous. It's very difficult to change. That's why you can silence reason, but not a heartbeat. So if you want to be smart and you want to change policy reform and convincing people, you can have the reason in your mind and you can build the policy with evidence, because I told you that. You can design the policy in a non-ideological way, but that is for you. Once you want to convince people, you need to transit your strategy from reason to emotions. And Pizarro knew this. Pizarro was a very good politician. And he knew this, that people were not going to be convinced because of the data or the evidence or what they saw. People were going to be convinced by emotions, by appealing to glory, by appealing to richness, by appealing to remembering through generations. One of the things that I noticed in all these years, I don't know what you think, but that's my personal experience that I would like to share with you, is that communication and emotions are underestimated. When you, I don't know how many of you, but I suppose that many of you, you are surrounded by professionals who are experts and they know very much about their topics, about democracy, about the rule of law, about human rights, about migration, about education, health, different kinds of policies. And when you get too much in that world, you start underestimating other skills like communication, for instance. I heard even people who said communication is not important. That's, the value of that. The most important thing is the expertise, the knowledge, and the technicalities of things. And that's a big mistake. And also arrogance, of course. Arrogance, thinking that you hold the truth and no more than the truth. So that's why I believe that communication is underestimated. But at the same time, it's untapped, of course, which is related to that. The opportunities and potentialities that you have in communicating well are infinite, And I encourage you, to all of you who are not exposed to training in communication and storytelling, I encourage you to get out from your comfort zone. Do that. Get out from your comfort zone and start learning techniques that maybe you have not been exposed to, if the things that I'm telling you make sense to you or not. So, good stories are remembered, and that's why get stuck in people's minds and in people's hearts. And good stories are remembered because they have harmony, and they have structure, and they have shapes. And that's really interesting. Stories indeed have shapes, and I'm going to show you. For instance, the first shape, it's very common in the traditional stories. Snow White, the Three Little Pigs, and Little Red Riding Hood had that shape. That shape means that you have three moments. You have the moments in which the story is telling you something great, nice, beautiful, and then a problem, and go down. A problem, and finally, the solution to that problem. That is the shape of the traditional stories. Cinderella is the same. For instance, Snow White. Start with very nice message. There was a lady who was so beautiful, and it was so good that even the birds start singing, in his body, and get together with her, and everything was happiness. This lady was, generous and beautiful and was wonderful. The story starts that way. And then the problem. But the lady had a stepmother that was really jealous about her. And he gave her an apple, and he was poisoned and died. And then, whoop, the solution. But a prince found the lady, kissed the lady survived, and both of them were everly happy. So that's the structure. The Little Pigs, the same thing. It goes with a very nice story. There were two little pigs, three little brothers, and they love each other very much, and they were building their houses. Oh, so nice. And they decided to build their houses in different ways. One with brick, the other with wood, and the other with a drap. And they said, that's nice. Oh, but there was a problem. There was a wolf that wanted to eat all of them, and the wolf started destroying the little houses. Oh my goodness. And then the solution. But the two brothers that were living in the other houses went to the brother that has the brick house, and they were safe, and the wolf just left. It's exactly the same shape. Okay? So that's why stories are remembered, because they have harmony. But you have other cases. You have the case of the creation. The creation doesn't have this shape. The creation has that shape. It's for you to see it this way, that goes from less to more. And the creation in the Bible, it's a story that gets more excited, and it goes up, 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 up. It's God. At the very beginning, there was God. And then God decided to create life. And he started creating the seas and the oceans, and then life, and then start creating the trees and the vegetables and the plants, and then the animals. And finally, in the sixth day, God created humans. and the seventh day God rest. It's a story that goes from less to more, right? And people remember that story because of the shape of the story, because it has harmony. And then we have other story, for instance, with other shape, which is the Old Testament. The Old Testament goes up, up, and then down. And the story of the Old Testament, it goes up first because God find the chosen people, the Jewish people, the chosen one, and God take them out from Egypt and save the Jewish and make all these miracles to save the Jewish people, the chosen ones. And then they were so happy and they were attached to their God, and then their God give them laws through Moses to shape the relationship between God and his people. Wonderful. Let's go up, 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 up. And then go down, 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 down. Where? After God gave the laws, the Jewish people start breaking the law progressively, and they start misunderstanding the message of God, and they were committing sins, and they were getting distance from God, and they were disobeying God, and that's how the Old Testament ended up. So that's the shape. People remember the story because it has a shape. And finally, another case, it's Star Wars. I am a very fan of Star Wars. And Star Wars, the shape of Star Wars is a circle, which is amazing. Why is a circle? Because you have a hero, Luke Skywalker, that is on the top, and he received a call for adventure, right? He said, oh, there is an empire, and you need to fight this empire, and there is a princess, and we need to rescue the princess. There was a call, and then Luke tried, and then Luke faced Darth Vader, and Luke lost. So faced Darth Vader, and then lost, and there was confused. What am I gonna do? I lost. I was defeated. But then Luke Skywalker went to Yoda, the master, to learn how to fight Darth Vader. And then Luke Skywalker returned to face Darth Vader for the second time, and he won. That's the story of Star Wars, the circle. What is my point? My point is that storytelling has not only to do with a story that is appealing because it's nice. Storytelling is important because it has a shape. It has harmony. And why you need to create a story for policy reform that has a shape and harmony? Because you want people to remember your story. You don't only need people who say, oh, how nice story, and then the next day they forget everything. What you want them to do is to remember the story, to repeat the story. So when you tell them your idea that has harmony and have a structure, they will not only remember it, but they will tell other people because it's easy to remember. That is why it's so important to do that. So from now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start studying one of the shapes that I use all the time. I'm not saying that this is the best shape. What I'm saying to you is that this is the one that I use. I don't know, I feel more comfortable, maybe because I tried from the very beginning and it worked. And I said, okay, I'm gonna do it again because it worked. There is no need to change completely the shape of my story, maybe for those reasons, but I'm gonna focus on that because the examples that I have from my experience are related to this shape in particular. So this shape has three different stages. The first stage is the hook. The hook is the first idea that you get to people and they say, oh, and they get trapped in the story and they want to know more. That's the hook, okay? So when you say, for instance, there was a beautiful lady that was so generous, so kind, that the trees start having flowers, and then the animals start singing around her. That's a hook, because, oh, that's wonderful. I want to hear more, right? So the first is the hook, when you make people put attention on you. The hook is extremely important because it's the starting point of the story in which you make people that are watching to other side to put attention to you and say, oh, interesting. I'd like to know more. The second point is the knot, the second phase of the of the of the story. And the knot is the problem. It's, oh, but something bad happened. That's the knot. Is the restriction, the limitation, the problem that you want to face, the danger. That it's in when people say, oh, what? So the first, in the start, the hook, the people say, surprise positively. In the second one, they get worried. And the third one, the solution, is when you said, okay, there was a problem, but I know how to solve it. And we can solve it in this way. And finally, the story ended up with a beautiful ending. Okay? These are the three parts. Remember this. How can we build stories from this structure and make sense of these stories related to policy reform when you are in government, or policy reform in general when you are trying to push this from a non-profit organization, or maybe you are in an international organization, or maybe an activist of social civil society? All of them have the opportunity to have ideas, to build a policy based on sound design, and to build storytelling. But before creating your story, now you know the shape, you know the stages that you need to create, and now we share, at least in my opinion, why stories are important, because they are based on emotions and people are moved by emotions. We already know that. But one of the things that I do all the time before crafting my storytelling, is that I try to understand to who this storytelling is supposed to be directed. You need to know that. Before crafting your story, you need to know to whom you're gonna deliver that story. Knowing your audience for the very beginning is extremely important. And that means different things. For instance, the first one is who they are. Your audience could be different. Maybe your policy idea is focused on the whole population. Maybe it's education policy. We need to reform the basic public education in my country. So my audience are the parents, right? So that will be your audience. And you need to know why they think, what do they want? What they are looking for in terms of the policy reform? What are their fears and interests related to that? What they like and what they fear in relation to the policy that you are proposing. But also, you need to understand what they gain and what they lose. If your idea is going to create costs for them in terms of the benefits that they're going to have. And this is, you can apply this for many kind of policies. For instance, when I was dealing with one policy reform that was really important, it was to buy the first Peruvian satellite. We want to have a satellite. We didn't have one. And because we need to solve many problems. One of the problems is what try to supervise the Amazon in Peru, that we have no information. If you have a satellite, you can have a lot of information from the ground. But the satellite also help us to try to see the damage of natural resources. When we have heavy raining, and we have earthquakes, with a satellite, you can localize and see the intensity of the damage. But at the same time, with the satellite, you can also gather information about the productivity of the land in different parts of the country. So the satellite is extremely useful. And there was a policy reform in terms that you need to convince a lot of people, and you need to create alliances in order to convince the authorities to buy the satellite. So I was called to lead this policy reform. And in that case, my audience were not the population, because the population were not going to make the decision about buying the satellite. My audience were Congress and the Ministry of Finance. They were my audience. So who they are, I knew who they were. What do they want? Okay, let's make the example. What do they want? In Congress, they are not very interested on the technicalities of the satellite. What congressmen want is to have political bullets to defend the government or to attack the government. That's their rationality. And you need to know that. You are interested in the satellite. You are interested in the country to have this for technical reasons, because you know, right? But you need to understand that the people that you're going to talk, they don't have those interests. They have political interest. And their political interest, how can I manipulate the information that I'm going to share to me about the satellite to damage the government if I am opposition, or to support the government if I am part of the government? If you have this in your mind, it's going to be much easier for you to implement policy reform. The other thing is, what do they like and what do they fear? One second. One second.
Julio will be back in just a moment. You know how it is. Life sometimes interrupts you. That happens. Like sometimes also I have to stop in the middle of a few calls because, I mean, family and so on that we have to attend. So while we are waiting, I just wanted to say really quick that we are keeping track of your comments in the chat box and also the Q&A. We will respond to some of them, and whenever we can, we are also responding live through the chat box. Back to you, Julio.
I'm so sorry. There was a noise in the background, and I didn't want the noise to perturb our conversation. I'm sorry for the. I already turned it off. All right. So that was my experience in Congress, to understand what they want. What do they gain and what do they lose? Political capital. Political capital. If I have all this information, it's going to be much easier for me to build a story. So why did I do in that case? I went to Congress and I made a presentation, but I didn't explain to them the technicalities of the satellite. And you know, they have these characteristics and the design, and this is going to be the exact use that we no. I didn't do that. I create another story for them to understand why this could be politically good for the country and why this could be useful for our country to improve the lives of people and make the government look better, politically speaking, because my goal was to get the satellite acquisition approved. But I'm going to go to specific examples now. All right. Okay. But the most important thing before start crafting the story is that the story need to be simple. Simple. So simple that even a 5-year-old could understand. And I am not exaggerating. Okay. And the second one is that it should be hard known. And I'm going to explain this a little bit. There are two ways of telling stories to convince people about something. You can create a story to convince people about a completely new idea that they don't know and is completely external to them, and you can convince them. And the second option that you have is to tell them a story of things that they already know, but they have not been able to name. Something that it's already inside of them, and they already feel that, but they have not been able to put a name of that on that frustration. Doing the first one is extremely difficult. It's very difficult to convince people about a completely new thing. It takes time. It is possible, of course it's possible, but it takes a lot of time and a ton of effort. Which is much better is when you are trying to interpret, when you are trying to translate something that they already are frustrated or they are already suffering. And that's the cases of the most successful policy reforms, when you are able to take the feelings of the people that are already in their hearts and put it in a policy reform. And I'm gonna put examples for you to try to make myself more clear about what I'm telling you. So let's start, and now we're going directly to the examples about storytelling for policy reform. One example. This is Peru's exports. This is the data, this is the evidence, part of the evidence that we had to make policy reform in Peru. So this is the exports in Peru in 2023. If you take a look, this is 100% of the exports, and the export has been divided by different industries or different products, okay? The products that are more color like orangey are products that are more like natural resources community. They have very low complexity in their production. They're raw materials, raw in mining and fishing, different, but these raw materials. And when you see the colors that go more like green, are products that are more complex in their production. They have high complexity for the production of that. So when you see this graph, it's very clear to all of us that the chunk of Peruvian exports are natural resources. And when a country exports only natural resources, they don't have control over their future, because natural resources do not depend, the income of natural resources do not depend on the country. It depends on the prices of international commodities. So that's a big problem, because it created a lot of instability. We cannot planify if we are not sure about the income that the country is going to receive every single year. Okay, so this is the case. So what did I do in order to try to create a story about policy reform dealing with that? This is a true case indeed. That is why I'm sharing with you. And this is a case that I was like obsessed since I was really young to try to make this reform. And I started this reform when I was Vice Minister of Industry in Peru in 2011. So we created this story following exactly the same shape and the same stages that I share with you. The first one was this idea. We are a rich country living in poverty. We are a rich country living in poverty. And people say, oh, yes, that's right. And why it's right, I need to explain a little bit about the Peruvian culture. Since we are little kids, since we are like 5 years old, in our mind all the time in school, private or public school, they are telling us every single day that Peru is a rich country because we have all natural resources, because we have everything. So when we grow up, that idea is stuck in our minds, that Peru is a rich country, that we have everything. But at the same time, what is stuck in our hearts is that there is a contradiction, that we have a rich country, but there is a lot of poverty. And we don't have progress, and we have not been able to develop our society. So that idea, it's already in people's hearts in Peru. And it's shocking. But nobody thought that idea in this phrase, right? In this phrase, we are a rich country living in poverty. That was the hook. And every time we saw that, people say, yes, that's true. Okay, so let's go to the following one. What is the not? The not is the reason why we are a rich country living in poverty is because we don't produce stuff with value. That is the problem. That is the limitation. We are in that situation because we don't produce stuff with value. That's why we are that. What is the solution? The solution is then we need to invest in innovation and technology. That was the harmony, right? We live in a rich country, but living in poverty. The problem and the explanation for that is that we don't produce stuff with value. What is the solution? The solution is that we need to invest in innovation and technology. If we say this story, if we tell this story to the population, almost everyone will get it. We didn't explain to them, you know what? Peruvian exports, 75% of Peruvian exports are commodities. And the prices of commodities has been really unstable in the last 30 years. And if we are unstable, that means that the income from exports are going to be uncertain, and that will affect the GDP of Peru. And because the GDP is going to be affected, are going to be less employment. Do you find that explanation very familiar? Well, yes. That explanation was the explanation that I used to give like 20 years ago. Because I believed that my knowledge and my expertise was so cool and so informed that it was going to be enough for people to understand. And I was completely wrong. That explanation is awful. That explanation is for you to understand. But for people, the audience, you need to tell a different story, like this one, which is simple and everybody could understand, and you haven't even shown a number. But here is not the most important part, but the complementary part of the storytelling is that you need to craft a phrase that summarizes the whole thing. And the phrase that we try to make this story was the following. You can read. If businesses invest in minds, the state must invest in minds. That phrase summarizes the story, and the story is the mirror of your policy design. Okay? Again, the phrase is the summary of your story, your storytelling. And your storytelling is the mirror of your policy design that is in your head about the technicalities. Don't make the mistake to go from your technicalities to the audience. Don't do that. You need to follow this process and craft these phrases that people could repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. If businesses invest in minds, it means in natural resources, let's make the state invest in minds. Why? Because if you invest in minds, you're going to promote innovation, you're going to promote technology that will make the situation change. So this is one example. This is an example of industrial policy reform, and that reform was started in 2011 and continued a few years later. This was a reform that was not completely successful. It was partially successful because the issue was included in the political agenda. New programs were created to promote innovation and the creation of new products. That happened, so that was really good because it was a breaking point in Peruvian history. But it was partially successful because there were not more improvements about that. There were not more political encouragement for that after that. So it's a reform that needs to be completed, but at least it started. Then we have, I'm going to share with you 3 examples, and then we're going to give time for Q&A for your interactions and then continue with the rest. The second example, data, again, policy design. This is a government effectiveness index in 2023. And this index has been, I'm sure that you are familiar with this index, has been built by the World Bank, right? And this map includes the indexes in every single country. The dark blue are the cases of countries in which the effectiveness of government is pretty high. And the light blue are countries in which government effectiveness is really low. So if you take a look at Peru, Peru is a country in which the effectiveness of the government is pretty low. The rule of law is pretty weak. The state is pretty weak. And the public services are not very good. They don't have very high quality. So that's the situation in Peru. And one example, something that happened in Peru is the time and the resources that you need to consume in order to get personal data. It's just a nightmare. Now things has improved, but a few years has improved. They're not good still. But in the last year has been horrible to get anything to ID, your driver's license, your passport in this case is a complete nightmare. You can take days just making lines because there is no online possibility in Peru to do these kinds of things as we can see in developed countries. So in the case of Pasaporte, for instance, my last experience to get a Pasaporte in Peru was to get to the office because we cannot do it online. So you make the line. The line to get into the building is 2 blocks. I am not kidding. The line to get to the office is 2 blocks in the street to get there. And once you get there, after 2 hours, you need to make 4 lines. 4 lines. The first line is for a bureaucrat to give you the format, just the format. The second line is to take the pictures. They're going to take you photos. Second line. Third line is to make photocopies of your ID. And the last 4 line is to return the form that you have already filled out. 4 lines, well, 5, including the 2 block lines, in order to get your passport, you spend around 4 or 5 hours in that office in order to get your passport. So it was a completely nightmare. So we needed a reform. And I conducted this reform. I'm going to tell you what the results were. But we needed to craft a story. So why are we going to do that? Because this requires a lot of technicalities and things. But we knew something. What we knew is that people had that frustration in their heart. But that frustration was hidden. And why was hidden? Because making lines in Peru got it was like the normality. And people normalized that yeah, that's how we live. So it was so consistent, it was so frequent that people, get accustomed to this kind of life. But the frustration was there, hidden. So how we created the story? So the hook for people to react was this idea. We are drowned in red tape. And people say, oh, yes, I living every single day like normal, but you are right. We are drowned in red tape. Okay, I'm listening. The problem is this one. We are drowned in red tape because state agencies don't share information. That's why. Because if state agencies share information, we could have it in just only one place. And you don't need to make lines. Interesting. Please, I'm keep listening. Well, what we need to do is to connect all of them with technology. Okay? So we are drowned in red tape. Yes, that's true. And because we are drowned in that tape, because state agencies, they don't share information. That's why we need to be in different places. So the solution is that all of them could share information using technology. We didn't explain to them, oh, what you need to do is you need to make a programming that it's in a language, in an informatic language that is homogeneous across the states, because all the data that they get from you, they needed to put it in a platform, and then we need to create apps, and those apps are going to serve you to make all your procedures, your personal documents online. We didn't say that because it was too technical. It was for you. So this is simple. And how was the phrase? The phrase that compiled everything was the following idea: life should be easier in Peru. And people get it. And they say, yes, I spend hours doing this, trying to get these documents, and these hours I could be working. In these hours, I could be with my children. I will be studying. I will be even resting. But instead of doing that, I spend hours in every single document that I need. It has make no sense. Yes, life should be easier in Peru. You are right. So the advantage of this reform is that this was a reform, that this was a problem that was already in people's hearts. But the beauty of the key in this case was to translate and to interpret the feeling of people into something more concrete that they could understand. And that campaign was extremely successful in terms of how people welcome the idea. But the reform failed. This reform was e-government policy reform. And the reform failed for different reasons. First, because it didn't have the political support that needs to be continuous. It was just an interest that was really short, and then we didn't have the political capital to be consistent with this reform. And the other problem is that you needed a lot of coordination of the state agencies to decide to share information. And we make some progress, but we were not able at the very end to have all of them in the same place. And why? Because these kinds of reforms need to be led by the head of the state, the prime minister or the president, because it needs to give direction to so many agencies, and that didn't happen. But the storytelling was successful and was good. And finally, the other example that I wanted to share with you, it's the political campaign that I participated. And we craft a very nice storytelling that indeed it was successful. This is the data. The data was I ran for president in 2016 and 2021. But this is the political campaign in the first time I ran in 2016. So months before the election in 2015, this was the snapshot of the voting preferences of the Peruvian population. In the preference, you see 4 candidates, but this is something really interesting, is that these are the candidates who are in the first places of the voting preferences, but at the same time, they were really hated. People didn't like them. If you see, the white columns are the voting preferences, and the black columns are the popularity of the candidates. And if you see, the 4 of them were in the 4 first place, but people hate them. They were incredibly unpopular. Fujimori, more than 60% of the population didn't like her. Kuczynski, 45. Alan Garcia, 65. Toledo, 75. So it was a contradiction, a lack of consistency between the people who were at the top of the preferences and how popular they were. And the reason for this pseudo contradiction is that people didn't have options. That yes, I don't like them, but I don't have options because those are the candidates. There are no more candidates. So I don't have another pool of people to choose. I need to choose among the people that I don't like. So that was the situation. That was the data told us. And we noticed something that happened in 2015, that aside from the fact that people didn't like them, there was another characteristic of all of them, that they were pretty old. This is the Peru population pyramid in 2015. And you know that this is men, women, and all of the ages in a different cohorts of Peruvian population. And you see, which is painted in pink in the pyramid, are the young people. And if you see between 18 and 40 years old, 55% of the population is there. So Peruvians are really, really young. But in contradiction, the candidates that were on the first places in the polls were really old. Keiko Fujimori has 42 years old, but she was representing his father. Indeed, people voted for Keiko Fujimori not because of her, but because of his father, who was really old, 79 years old. But also Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, 79 years old when he was running. Toledo, 71. And Garcia, 68. There was a mismatch between the profile of the candidates that were on the top of the preferences and the profile of the Peruvian population. In my case, at that time, I had 45 years old. So how can we take advantage of this situation? You have two situations in which they are old, but at the same time, people don't like them. Okay? Follow me. So what we did was to create this storytelling with the same shape. What was the hook to get people attract our attention? It was, we can't move forward in the modern world because we were in the third and the fourth industrial revolution, technological change, everything, and Peru was stuck in the 20th century. Everything was old, everything was difficult. We were selling natural resources. It was like Peru were not enjoying modernity, and everyone knew that. So we said, we cannot move forward into the modern world. And people say, yes, yes, yes. Why? Well, why? The reason is because our politicians are stuck in the past. And people say, that's true. These guys are pretty old and they belong to, they have been in politics for decades and they don't understand modernity because they're pretty old and they have been in politics forever. Yes, we cannot move forward into the modern world because our politicians are stuck in the past. So what is the solution? The solution is, it's time for someone new and prepared, right? Which goes exactly against of what was happening. So what was the phrase? What was the phrase? To take advantage of the fact that the guys who were at the top of the voting preferences, they were old and they were ugly because people didn't like them. So the phrase was, Guzman against the dinosaurs. That's how we position ourselves in the political campaign. Guzman versus the dinosaurs. And the dinosaurs was all these candidates that they were not liked and were really old. And it was extremely successful that put us in the first position of the voting preferences. We were projected to win the presidency 1 month before election day. And 1 month before election day, I was taken out from the race from a judge who received $600,000 in bribes in order to take me out from the race. And why they did that? Because they didn't have any other alternative. We were just going up, 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 up. There were just very few days left for the election date. So the only option that they had was to get into corruption, take me out from the race, and the rest is story. But the campaign worked Very well. This was the presidential political campaign. So I'm going to stop here, and I would love to receive your questions, your insights, and your comments of the things that we have been sharing so far. And then I will wrap up, and I will share a couple of more ideas with you to end up this session. So please, Natida, I would love to hear the comments and the questions from our colleagues.
Thank you so much, Julio. Before we dive into questions, I know Mario wanted to address something that came out of the chat. So Mario, please, you can have the floor.
Yeah, just want to make it because obviously we're not going to solve that part of the conversation right now. But it's like I saw, particularly from I believe, I forgot the names, Daniela and Anna, I guess, if my memory doesn't fail me, made a comment precisely about the language, right? Like that sometimes the language in the story can reinforce certain elements of colonialism, for example, that are very much entrenched in the way that we have even been raised, right? Like the way that we have received these stories over time also. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because it is important. I teach a class on development every spring at the University of Maryland, for example, and we have a whole session about the language in development, right? And how it limits ourselves. And in the end, what the purpose is in the work that we do. Just wanted to acknowledge that. I also wanted to acknowledge the question, a couple of questions that were the first ones actually by Mambato Oke. Hopefully I'm pronouncing well your name, Mambato. That are probably beyond the scope of this session specifically, but are extremely important. And maybe we can actually respond to those offline and to the whole group, right? Like that. And we can discuss, Julio. Goes more beyond the scope of the storytelling, but it goes to the issue of funding, localization, and actually getting youth particularly involved in decision-making spaces, particularly at the global level, right? Like, and this is actually at the core of what we do at the Governance Action Hub, particularly with our lines of work on democracy. So I'm going to stop there, and please, Natida, just take it away with questions, and then Julio just giving some elements of answers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mario. Before we open the floor for live questions, I'd like to begin with just a few that have been pre-selected and pre-submitted by participants ahead of today's session. So our first question comes from Nanaya from the Kara Development Foundation. She asks specifically, how can storytelling be strategically used to shape public narratives, mobilize communities, and influence policymakers in ways that make reform messages more relatable and inspire real action?
Thank you, Natida. I think the question, I hope that was responded by the ideas that we already shared. If I could wrap up first, I will say a few things that I already said, but I'm going to wrap up. The first one is that you need to separate from the very beginning what is the technical knowledge and the policy design from the storytelling. Don't get confused. Don't use the policy design to convince people, because you're not going to do that. People don't react for your policy design. People react for emotions, and that's the second idea. Once you have separated policy design and communication, and you go to communication, you need to be sure that the communication is not about reason, it's about emotions. And the third idea is that once you get convinced that it's emotions, you need to structure and you have harmony in your story. And the harmony and the shape of your story could be very different. It could be linear, it could be like a wave, it could be like a circle. You can make your decision, but it should have harmony and shape for people to remember. Why is it important for people to remember? Not only for them to get it emotionally, but for them to repeat. That's exactly what you want. So those are the three most important elements that I could wrap up from considering that question.
Thank you. That was a great question and a great answer. We also received another thoughtful question submitted anonymously. So it reads, one of the common pieces of feedback I've gotten is to develop my voice as a public intellectual in order to support systems change. However, I've been also told by industry insiders that major publications like the New York Times only publish known or famous thought leaders. What publications or news outlets are a good choice for those of us who aren't famous, but who want our work to be read by policymakers?
Well, the first thing that I would do to choose or to think about the mean, the mode of communication and the venue of communication is, what is the audience that I would like to reach? What is my purpose? If my audience are experts in my field, well, there are different ways. Conferences are the best way. Conferences of papers, academic papers. But these are options that are very limited to a very a small group of people that are there. And it takes a lot to make a paper or to organize a conference. If your audience is a little bit bigger, like a community, well, you have other audiences. You have public gatherings. You can organize workshops. And if your audience is the population, when you have the social media to do that. So you need to be very clear about who is your audience and then choose your venue. If you are saying, I would like to be known, and because of that, I need to publish in the Washington Post, in my opinion, that's not the way to go. Because what you are prioritizing is your personal exposure. It's just, I want to be there because it's cool. Yes, it's cool, but you need to think about yourself. Yeah, but it's going to achieve your strategic goal, which is reaching people. I've been working on policy making for so many years. But indeed, the most effective way for me to achieve my personal goals is to talk to regular people, because my idea it's to improve their lives. So we need to be very, very careful with that. What we are looking for? We are looking for notoriety, we are looking for applause, or we are looking for change. And if you answer that question, it's going to be much better for you to choose your venue. Remember, there are times in which you need to convince experts. But there are many, many times in which you don't need to convince experts. You need to convince people. And to convince people, you don't need to publish in the New York Times. That's what I could share with you.
No, that's great advice. Thank you so much, Julio. And now we'll move on to live questions from the audience. I know we've received a few in the Q&A in the chat box already. I'll actually start by inviting any participants who would like to share their questions directly with Julio. If you could do that by just raising your hand for us to make it easier, and then we can actually enable your microphone. So I see we have a hand raised right now. Bear with me. All right, Susrita, if you have a question, please feel free to ask.
Hi, hello everyone. Hi Julio, excellent session. Just one quick comment and maybe follow up with a question. So I'm a project manager, and my role as a manager for all policy advocacy projects. So far, we have always been told that without technical insights, policy advocacy shouldn't be even attempted. So thanks for at least breaking that myth and kind of encouraging non-technical people like myself to take on the lead. My question here is more about with how to speak to policymakers to change the way they are thinking about policy. I think, if I have not mistaken, I think your examples had a lot of community engagement, which is fantastic. And I see that there is pressure tactics there, but ultimately the policymakers have to make it their business. So how do you tell stories effectively to them? That's all from mine. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Susrita, and thank you for your words. It means a lot to me. Well, it's challenging, and it's challenging because it's really ironic. But in order to solve a public problem or to fight for a specific issue in social justice, you need several ingredients. It's like cooking. When I cook Peruvian fried rice, I need rice, I need eggs, I need soya, I need chicken, I need garlic, and different things. If I don't have every single ingredient, my Peruvian fried rice is not gonna be good, right? So in order to make change, social change, you need different ingredients, and those ingredients are policy making. You need to design it, but at the same time, you need research that will give you the information to design your policy. So research, policy making, but at the same time, you need knowledge of government. You need how the government works and how to implement those programs. Yeah, and the other ingredient is politics. You need power and political will to make that idea happen. So those are the ingredients of social justice. And unfortunately, those people, they don't talk each other. And it's ironic because all of them are interested in the same thing, like say education policy, like one example, very specific case, all of them are interested, but they don't talk each other. And they not only don't talk, they underestimate each other and they don't respect each other. The researchers believe that the policymakers are researchers wannabe, right? They don't understand the work of policymakers in relation to them. Policymakers believe that politicians are corrupt, ignorant, they don't know anything, and they are not interested in helping their people. Politicians believe that policymakers and researchers live in the clouds, and they don't have any idea of real life, and they are in front of the computers, and they don't know how people live. That's why politicians believe. And government officials, they said, nobody understands me, because the only thing I need to do is to execute my budget and fill my objectives, and nobody understanding because the politician is asking me things that are impossible. The research and the policymaker, they are dreaming about the things that can be done. They don't know the limitations of government. So you see, it's like talking with people in the Babel Tower, right? They talk different languages. They don't communicate each other. And that's really challenging. Why I had the opportunity to see social justice from different angles? Because I don't belong to any of them. I've done research, yes, for many years. I publish, yes, but I don't feel that I belong to them. I've been policymakers for years, 10 years at the IDB, doing policy making, designing policy, but I don't feel that I belong to that community. I don't. I've been in government, yes. I've been deputy prime minister, I've been vice minister, I've been president of the cabinet of vice minister. Yes, I've been in government, but I don't feel I belong to the bureaucracy and the government. And finally, I've been a politician, yes, but I belong to the politician, to the politics, no. It's this case is because I've been in different places, because I didn't look for a career. I just followed my dreams, and I faced risk, and I just wanted to do what make me happy, okay? But that doesn't happen regularly. So it's challenging. How I learned how this multidisciplinary approach and how communication is extremely important, even though I was trained in research and policy making, is because I failed. And that's something that I would like to give you to think when you are alone, is that failure is the shortest way to succeed and to learn. And I understood that because I failed, because I tried to do it in the traditional way, as many people try to do it, and I didn't get. And I was so committed with my purpose that I said, okay, I want to learn, and I want to open. So responding to your question, how can we do this? One of the things that we can do is to try to be translators, is to try to be bridges. It's one of the things that I try to do in recent years, is to become myself a bridge. That with a river, and you have both sides, policymakers, communicators, and everything, and I try to be the people who connect them. Like what I'm doing with you, is connecting and telling you, you know what, I believe that you need to work together. and trying to put this seed in their minds and to see what is the point? What is the point that you write a wonderful paper? Wonderful. What is the point? If nobody's going to use it, you're going to publish in the Journal of Development Economics. Good for you. What is going to happen? Nothing. So what is the point? You want to make change? Well, I'm sharing this with you. You need to listen to other people. At the same time, policymakers, what is the point of designing wonderful things and then going to the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister didn't put attention because they didn't understand a word of what you're saying? You work for years doing this and in one meeting you fail? Well, you don't want to do that, right? So you need to listen. So my advice, unfortunately, is not like straightforward or a clear solution, but it's a hope, which is let's become bridges among people for them to value a multidisciplinary approach and trying to share with them that the only way to change people's life, if that's our purpose, is to listen to others.
Thank you so much for participating, Susrita. I think we can take one more question before we go back to the lesson. If you'd like to do so, please raise your hand and we can enable your microphone. We'd love for this to be as interactive as possible. If not, I will read the next question on the behalf of Anuradha. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. They ask, could there be other forms of shapes in storytelling other than the four depicted as exemplary examples? It's a generic aspect thought just out of curiosity.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. No, there are many. As long as the shape has harmony and they have a structure, is workable. And the reason, well, harmony is really obvious, right? It has harmony. It's something that it's sticky, that it's easy to remember. It's beautiful, it's nice. It has harmony. Songs, they're nice and people remember it because it has harmony. And a structure is important because when you give people a structure, it's very difficult for them to get out from that structure. So when you define the lines, the mind of the person who is listening to you is putting attention on those lines. They don't get out. That's why the structure, it's important. But the shape could be different. I'm going to tell you one alternative shape, which is the tower shape. The tower shape is this, like towers, like the castle. It's a little bit more complex, but it's like the towers in the castle with the soldiers with arrows get positioned when they are defending the castle, like that. Okay, so that shape, for instance, is Martin Luther King's storytelling. Martin Luther King's used that shape, and the example is the following. It's like excitement, sadness, excitement, sadness, excitement, sadness. So what you are doing is you are taking people in a roller coaster of emotions. Is and that excites people and has harmony, has a structure, and make people mobilize. And the example of Martin Luther King is, I have a dream. I have a dream that two little girls, one black, another white, hold hands and they live together in harmony. But life is not like that. We have discrimination, we have racism, and those little girls cannot be together. And then, but I have a dream in which all humans, we could be treated equally in the eyes of God, because we have been created in God's images. And then down, but life is not like that. We are prisoners of our culture of slavery and abuse. Yes, that's the structure. Up, up, up is like the castle. And that works? Of course it works. So yes, the answer is yes, there are more shapes and they work, and the conditions, in my opinion, is that they call harmony and structure.
Thank you so much, Julio. If you want to continue with the lecture, this is, I think, a good place for us to continue.
All right. So thank you very much for the questions. Very, very, very thoughtful. We are in the final minutes of the presentation, and the thing that I wanted to share with you. Sorry. Finally, it's about communication skills. Good policy reform needs great storytelling, and I already said that. But what we have not talked about it, and that I left for you to think about it, is your skills to communicate that. You can be great in crafting the storytelling, but now you need to communicate it. And how will you do that? And that requires other sets of skills, which is how you engage emotionally with people. And there are many tools and instruments and trainings in order to do that. I'm not going to go there. I've been trained for years. I've been trained. When I get into politics, I really wanted to make change. And I understood that communication was key. And I saw myself and I say, oh, Julio, you have some qualities that could help, but you have other qualities that are not helping. So you need to work on that. So I was trained for years, and I improved a little bit. I'm not there in the place that I would like to be, but I encourage you to train, and don't trust in your talents. This is something that I tell the people that I really love, and I start telling that to my own daughter. My daughter is brilliant. Is brilliant, and for her, it's so easy to talk in front of people. He's extrovert, he's opinionated, he's well-read, but she has a challenge that she trusts too much in her talents. What I mean is that she believes that because she can talk freely and comfortably, and she's extrovert, she don't need preparation because she's gonna do well. So when you trust in your talents, you have a very quick limitation, a really fast ceiling, a really short ceiling. You cannot go beyond because you are so confident of yourself. But the way you're gonna excel and you're gonna go to the clouds is if you have those talents and you train those talents and you are disciplined, you are ordered, you have a structure, and you really try to learn, those talents are going to take you to the clouds. So that's my recommendation when you try to communicate something. Don't trust in your natural talents. Use your talents also as an opportunity for you to achieve the real growth. This is one. And the other one is a message from all of you who believe that you don't have the communication skills to talk about policy, and not to design this storytelling, because I know that you are, of course, able. I'm saying how to communicate yourself with people. For all of them who believe that they don't have the natural talents to communicate, I'm going to tell you my story. I didn't. I'm pretty introvert guy. Mario know me very well, the director of the Governance Action Hub, for years. And he knows that I'm not an extrovert guy. It's very difficult for me to talk in public, indeed. I'm very private, but I learn. And it took me for a while to get out of my comfort zone. One anecdote that I want to share with you is that every time my campaign manager told me to go to the TV station to give an interview, I said, why? Why, John? Why again? I don't like going to TV shows. I don't like to be in public. I really don't like it. It makes me so uncomfortable. But when you look at my videos, I've been interviewed by CNN, Al Jazeera, all these media. It doesn't look like I don't enjoy it, but I didn't. I feel completely uncomfortable doing that. So how I improved? I improved because I care. That was the first session that I shared with you. That was the basic things to discuss with you in all this workshop, that you need to know yourself and you need to know why you are there. If there is a purpose and if there is a mission, you will have the strength to change. Believe me, I put the example of the mother, of the guy who is really undisciplined. He doesn't even can make their own bed, is really disorganized, is immature, and then something happened to him. He became a father. And he changed. And then after 6 months, he's a completely different person. And the family said, what this guy is? What happened? He had a purpose, and it was the baby. And the purpose gave him the strength to wake up earlier, to take care of him, to be responsible and disciplined in life. So dealing with policy reform and trying to make social justice, it's pretty similar. If you don't have the talents of things that you need to do that, you will develop those talents because you have the strength of your mission and of your purpose. So the final message was for those people among you that you believe that you cannot do this, and that's not true. Because in my case, as I said, I couldn't. And until now, I have really, you cannot believe that, but until now, I have really hard problems to go to an event, social event, and engage with people. I have problems until now because I'm really introvert. But I developed how I am talking to you this way, and I hope that you can believe me because it's true. I talk naturally to you and honestly with you and openly and continuously with you, not because it's particularly my nature, but because I really want you to learn. I really want you to share and not make the mistakes that I made, and at least to anticipate and to know and to be aware of things before you get engaged. That's my purpose, and that's why I'm doing this. And so that purpose gave me the strength and gave me the security and the self-assurance of talking to you like I'm talking now. But as I said, if I go to a social gathering right now, I will be a complete mess and I completely ineffective. So that was going to be my last thought about storytelling and communication. And we're going to end it up here. If you have another question, I will be glad to receive it. Just to remind you two things. The next session, it's about the system. We're going to discuss the king of the storytelling, of how, if you know yourself and you have your purpose, great. And then you have your policy design, very serious, very professional, great. Then you develop your storytelling, excellent. Well, unfortunately, that's not enough because you need to understand how the government works and how the budget works and what are the limitations and all the things that you need to take into account to make that happen in terms of institutional change for your policy reform. That is going to be the next session. So I hope that you can be with us again next Wednesday. And the second thing is to reinforce what Mario told you from the very beginning. This session, this workshop is 6 sessions, right? That all this thing. But maybe you belong to an organization, non-profit, international organization, or your workplace, or your community, your association, and you want this presentation for them because you find them useful. So we can do that. We can arrange a presentation using the same material and focus on the areas that maybe your organization is more interested. So we can do that in a customized way. We can do it online, or we can travel. We can arrange ways of being there and having a presentation, it's something that Mario offered to you at the very beginning of this session, that we can maybe think about that, traveling and share with you all these experiences to navigate in policy reform. So please, if you have any final question that I can address, great. If not, we are ended up the session, and I hope I can see you next Wednesday. Yes.
Thank you, Julio. I think I saw a hand raised, so if there's anyone who wants to ask anything, we'll probably go just to the top of the hour. If not, I can ask a question from behalf of the Q&A section. So I think the hand disappeared, but I'll take a question Mary put in the chat. Is the corruption you mentioned able to be solved with better governance structures and ethics mechanisms?
Well, I know corruption not from a concept or a definition of the theoretical word. Corruption exists with name and last name. I know the faces of corruption and the things that they are willing to do to survive, even killing. I told you that I lived with 3 bodyguards, 24/7 with guns, all the time with me. And I already shared with you that every single month, one of my bodyguards went to the places, to these neighborhoods in which the mafia lived. Every single month they went there to ask the mafiosos if I was in the list of the sicarios. And every single month he told, no, Julio, you are not there. Still, you're not there. But so I know how corruption, all the means that they can do to defend their interests. And corruption exists in every single country in the world. The thing with corruption is not the absence or the presence of corruption, is the intensity of corruption, the intensity, which is very different. The best way to fight against corruption, it's the rule of law. Indeed, yes, there are policies that are reactive, which is the police force, yes, the judiciary, the prison system, yes. There are more structural ways of fighting with corruption, which is education, opportunities for all, yeah. But there are intermediate, structural, but intermediate policies that are directed, related with corruption, which is the rule of law. If you have a country in which every single person knows that he's not beyond the law, and you have the laws that are respected, the contracts that are respected, that you have security, that you can work freely and thinking that nobody's happened to you, that is the reason why corruption goes down. The rule of law. And research, of course, support this idea. And building the rule of law is a process that takes a lot of time, but there is some kind of sequence of building the rule of law, because rule of law means different things. It's how strong institutions are in different areas and different dimensions. But if you think about it, this is not something that I read, it's what I think because of my experience in politics and being in the government. I believe that is a mother reform, like it's the mom of all reforms that will make the rule of law happen. And I believe that the first reform, the mother reform of all of them, is electoral reform. And what I believe that? I believe that because most, if not all, of the reforms that make institutions strong, independent, with good bureaucracies, with independent budgets to make decisions and to have the equilibrium of powers, all of them in democracies start in Congress and the decision of the executive. So if we don't have a good quality of people in Congress and in the executive, it's extremely hard to build the rule of law. So electoral reform is extremely important. It's, in my opinion, the beginning of everything. If you set up in that reform clear norms, transparency, open opportunities for everyone, respect of the results, and incentives for parties to be created and have a clear agenda and be present and participated and being active, the result of that framework is that it's obvious good people are going to be elected. But if you have an electoral system in which there are no parties, in which everyone with no precedence, with any condition could participate, that you have 25 candidates in which you need to choose, in which you participate and then someone could take you out from the race because he received a bribe, or maybe because someone win the election and then the opponent is not respecting, is not recognizing the results, you know, of course, the consequence is that not the very good people are going to be elected. So I believe that electoral reform is the beginning of everything. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, Julio. And thank you to everyone who's shared their questions and reflections. I know we have about 3 more minutes left. So if you didn't get to your questions today, please feel to follow up with us afterwards because we'd really love to continue the conversation. And just with the remaining time, I'll pass it over to Mario to close.
Final thoughts. First of all, thank you everyone for showing up. Second, thank you for so many of you that have stayed and now regularly stay overtime. Originally, we planned for these sessions to be 90 minutes, but given the thematic and the engagement, we have done by default extending 30 extra minutes. If you were not able to stay for the extra time in previous sessions or next sessions, that's perfectly fine. Just go back, please, if you have a chance, to the appropriate channels to look at the remaining of the session or to go over many of the concepts. While we were having the session, I was just exchanging with Ivor Chipking, a colleague, a friend in South Africa, right? Like, who was sharing about like how today they just passed in South Africa the Public Service Amendment Bill, which is a huge undertaking and the implications of it. There's a whole story, being a bit familiar with what has been the road to South Africa to this. Like to get to this point and the opportunities it opens as a public sector reform in South Africa. Now, the key thing is like how that story is going to continue in terms of implementation, right? Like, so it sticks. Because as Julio also mentioned, and I guess that it has been very clear, right? Like, the ones that the public leaders that are trying to push for reform, I mean, like, are not the only ones building a story. Also, the people that are trying to block the reform, right, that benefit from the status quo, they build their own story, which can be also very powerful. How is it that we are reacting to this? How is it that we respond to this? How is it that we engage into alliances, connect with others, to be able not only to reach the reform that is desired, but actually that reform leads to the changes that is supposed to actually pursue, right? Like, so that trust is built over time, that these processes are possible, but also fruitful in terms of to actual results for people. It is a huge endeavor. And thank you so much for being here with us, for sharing your questions and your thoughts. We do not have all the answers, certainly. But hopefully this gives you some frameworks and ideas and suggestions. And you know what? Possibility of connecting among yourselves. I see how many people that do not even know each other, have never heard of each other, are starting to even respond to each other comments on the chat box. This is important. Over time, maybe this is the beginning of a community. Good luck in your work this week. We hope to see you next week for the next part of the story. We're halfway in these masterclass sessions. You see now how the dots start to connect. Let's start thinking also, what is next? What is it that we can do together? How can we help? But also how you can help each other over time and connect over time. We're very much looking forward to have that conversation with you. Thank you so much. Have a great week ahead and good luck. See you next week. Thank you, Julio. Thank you, Natida. Bye-bye.